So yeah, talking about emotions. We got into emotions, and we sort of came up with some stuff which I've decided to go into a little bit more detail. Found some kind of interesting things about that. So let's kind of go through this. Did a little bit of hello. What the hell? Yeah, there we go. I've got too many applications running at once. Okay, so we're looking at the top level relationship. We started this last week. We started going through this, which is the relationship between the player and the game, which frames all other everything else that you're doing. So, we relate back to this when we're designing the game. This is going to answer a lot of questions at lower levels as well. So there we go. We looked at this last week. We've got a player. The player has an experience. So we're very much talking about the player experience this week, and that player experience happens when the player plays and interacts with the game, the game that we're designing. So, and we had 5 different levels or 5 different categories there. Number 1 was emotion, or is emotion. Number 2, mind and mental state. Number 3, meaningfulness. Number 4, social interaction, which is really focusing on multiplayer games, which we don't have so far. You're not doing multiplayer just yet. Not just yet, but you might do once you have a look at what Hideo Kojima
so
did with.
So far down the pipeline.
Yeah, no, I don't recommend it for your first game. That's for sure. And then we also have time and space, which is a little bit sort of a little bit the odd one out, but it's kind of there because it is also important. It doesn't impact the other ones. So the relationship of emotion. Now we're looking at this last week, and I guess I came across first up the Circumplex, what's called the Circumplex Model. And we did go into this, and it was quite interesting. I've come across this certainly in the past, but I didn't really apply it. This is sort of the first time I've really looked at applying it. And it has 2 dimensions. So you can see the diagram on the right-hand side there. So we've got 2 dimensions, and we've got like a circumplex model there. And we didn't go in last week into what the different dimensions are. So the first one on the y-axis is arousal. So you go from positive arousal to negative arousal, and then on the x-axis is valence. So valence is talking about basically something being pleasant or unpleasant. So happiness versus sadness is an example there, and you can see there distressed versus happy and content, sad and distressed. So valence, is something pleasant, is something not pleasant. When it comes to arousal, you can think of like that, sitting in a meditative position in a Buddhist temple compared to running around on a football field. So that's kind of like, one is high arousal, the other one is low arousal. There's also anger versus depression. So when it comes to emotion, we're talking about those 2 different things. And I thought that these are really useful, even beyond just the emotional aspect of what we were talking about, because those ideas of arousal, we did sort of go into this a little bit last week, didn't we? Where we talked about what state a player might be in the game. We sort of talked about the calm, relaxed, content, happy, excited, alert, tense, angry, distressed, sad, depressed, bored kind of things. Do you remember some of what we were talking about last week, Fraser?
Yeah, I think it was a really interesting exercise to think about when you're playing a game, what sort of region you're sitting in, or for our design perspective, using this as a way to try and map the feelings we want the players to be experiencing. And how we can move between them as well.
Yes, it's a very interesting one to kind of look at. So let me just move forward. Now, I was, even when we were looking at this, I was thinking, because we do talk about these things called interest curves, and I do teach this when we talk about game design, but they're always taught, I guess, in a little bit of a sort of an abstract sense. Have these interest curves. So you start, if you see there, the beginning of the game, you obviously start from a low level of interest, and then the idea is when you first start a game, you should take them up high, the player up high to a high level of interest, and then you go drop down, and then so that sort of sets the tone for the game, and then you've got you go up to the B section there, and then you slowly go up and up, and then you get right up to the top level where we've got E, and then it drops down, and the sort of game ends, or maybe the level ends, the section ends, or anything like that. Now, I was thinking about these ideas of interest curves, and really how in many ways, if we go back, they could be, you could in fact have a two-dimensional element of this. And instead of, I think to me, what the interest curves generally tend to reflect is the arousal state, I would say. So sort of level of excitement. So you might start here, then you go up and you're sort of, maybe fighting and stuff like that in a fighting game. Or maybe you're driving a car in a car racing game or something, and then it drops back down to something less intense, and then you go up. But here, of course, we have two dimensions. So we've got that arousal, we've got that level of excitement, but then we've also got this other one, this pleasant, unpleasant dimension. So Fraser, we did talk about sort of some things last week, I think. Got any thoughts maybe on that? I mean, I'm kind of interested to see whether you agree or disagree, or...
Yeah, I think, calling out arousal as being sort of that interest curve, I definitely agree with. When we were talking about it, I kept thinking about the classic sort of narrative building technique of graphing out the climax points and having that rise and fall in tension.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I think valence, that idea of pleasantness, feels like what games bring to the table in terms of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, maybe there's like an instinct for me to try and stick to the positive valence.
Mm-hmm.
But similar to the intensity, I feel like the most engaging or compelling is going to come from pulling the player back and forth, or
the contrast.
pulling the player into a state where they don't want to be and letting them work their way back into the state they do want to be.
Absolutely. Can you think of games that you play? I guess Yakuza's one you're playing. Does that have elements of that change in valence, specifically that pleasant, unpleasant aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like, where is it coming from, right? Like, we talked a little bit last week about how my intentions for Arvo is to use the narrative to bring some of the valence and arousal in.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm looking at Yakuza, I keep trying to, my brain is pulling me towards this idea of the gameplay being pleasant or not. But I think, it can come from multiple aspects. I guess the example I gave last week was the sort of the boss fight, where towards the end you get the reveal that one of the characters has been killed by this person you've now got to fight, and so I guess maybe that is a good use of that valence.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of as you're reaching the end of the boss fight, the valence is going up in that sense that you're accomplishing it and you're going to complete the goal, but then when you see that your goal has been shifted, the thing you were trying to stop has in fact happened, that valence sharply, it pulls you back, and you go, oh well, I fought all those all those Yakuzas just for my goal to be unattainable.
Yeah, I think of a game that I have mentioned, I think multiple times before, Rust, and there's some very much unpleasant stuff in Rust. It's kind of to me, Rust reflects real life in a way. because of that unpleasant competition that you have, where you start out and it's very much PvP, and you start out in a world naked with just a rock and a torch, and you've got to go and collect resources, build a little base, and build up from there and sort of develop weapons and things like that. And you can basically the most dangerous opponent are other players. So, and it can be like it really shows you just how unpleasant it really can be. Like when you build a little base and whatever, and you get attacked by someone who then goes and raids your base, kills you, teabags you, and takes all your shit. That's really unpleasant. Let me tell you, that's a really, really unpleasant experience. And I'm just kind of interested. Like I am very interested in this whole concept of that part of gaming that's not, because I hate the term fun. I think fun is just such a vacuous, useless term to describe games. Fun is a nothing term, particularly because of these things like this. Because you do have these unpleasant experiences, which, although they are unpleasant on their own, I think in context are actually compelling and will draw you back. And I'm assuming Yakuza, the experiences you're talking about in Yakuza, have a similar effect.
And I think another example that I've been thinking about is The Last of Us Part 2. And specifically, I think the second episode came out on Monday. And
are you talking about the game or the TV series?
I think you can use the TV series to compare to the game to see this sort of demonstration of valence really well, where in the game very early on, avoiding some of the biggest spoilers that probably everyone knows, but there's a moment where you can hear someone being tortured, and you have to force your character to descend this really narrow staircase to this door, where when you open that door, you're going to confront something that is both like generally unpleasant, but also narratively really impactful and unpleasant. And that moment where the same moment happens in the show, where the character has to walk down the stairs in a similar setup, but the difference between watching the character walk down the stairs and forcing the character yourself to have to go down the stairs to confront it completely changed how impactful that scene is. And I think that's what I found really interesting about The Last of Us 2, the game as a whole, is it's full of those moments where you are required to do something unpleasant to progress the game. And I think it's like I said at the start of this, like that I've only ever experienced through games. I have never had such a strong connection to this sort of valence, pleasantness idea outside of this medium.
I think this is a topic that could really be explored a lot more. This whole idea of exactly what you're saying, where to progress in the game, you need to face an unpleasant. I mean, unpleasant is not the word, really. I mean, if you look at someone being tortured, I mean, quite a harrowing potential situation. And the fact that in the game, you're making decisions you're doing things, you're using your agency within the game to actually do what you need to do to deal with that unpleasant situation, or which might bring you into that unpleasant situation as well. That kind of, so between the sort of narrative and the interaction, I guess is what we're talking about. That when you bring those together, you've got that unpleasant narrative and an interaction which insists that you maybe move towards that unpleasantness. I don't know whether that's the case, but I think this is a very interesting area that deserves a lot more exploration.
I think good designers use it all the time, just maybe less fully. Like the way that The Last
maybe
of Us
less
Part
consciously.
2, yeah, like The Last of Us Part 2, it's so intertwined between the actions, the design, the art, and the narrative. But even I was thinking about the concept of like funneling with level design, where you know we you might start with a really wide open area and slowly shrink it down and down and down just to reveal another area to get that sense of scale. And that feels like a very similar premise in the idea of typically we don't want to be put into tight, narrow spaces, and so you're pulling people out of that positive valence, the nice wide open space, into the narrow one, just to let them have a sense of relief to come out the other side. So I feel like you could pull it out of so many different examples, but yeah, I think when it's really done well, it's using everything in the medium that we can to influence that player experience.
Now let me, because this is not all we have, I did some research and there's another model which is actually has a third dimension, and I think in fact the model we just looked at came from this model originally, but I think this is really, I think for when it comes to game design again, I think this actually adds another really interesting dimension. So this is called the PAD model, the PAD model, and PAD stands for pleasure-arousal, which are the two dimensions we've just looked at. But then a third dimension called dominance, which the other one doesn't address. I guess for simplicity's sake, perhaps. So the three dimensions, we've got valence is the same, arousal is the same as what we've had. But then there's a third one, this dominance one, where you've got the difference between dominance versus submissiveness. And so example there, we've got control versus no control. And the interesting one is anger versus fear. And I find that, excuse me, I find that very interesting because quite often, if you think of either personally or maybe in a story, you see people being in a fearful situation. Maybe they're being threatened by someone or something, and then there's that fight flight. So you've either got the fear response or the anger response, but they're kind of the same thing. They're in the same, if we were to go back to our previous one, they're kind of in the same area here. High arousal, higher negative valence, but there's like something's missing here. So fear and anger sort of both are around here, but we don't, on this simpler model, we can't really distinguish between the two. But if we go down here, sorry, if we get into this one, we've got this dominance. So basically control, no control, power, no power, anger or fear. So this one brings in this other element which I think we do experience, that fight or flight. You got the option. You can be in a fearful situation. You've got the option of just going and attacking someone, perhaps if you're being attacked yourself, or you can run away, or you can just cower in fear there. So that other dimension is really, really interesting. Have you got any comments on that? Any thoughts about that third dimension?
This feels like classic horror game techniques, right? The idea of like, I know there's heaps that have done it, like Outlast, intentionally not giving you a way to fight back, which only gives you the option to run, which can help a lot of players fall into that sort of fear response. But it is interesting because, yeah, I think I like the way you worded it, the fact that as humans we have that choice, either the fight or the flight, but when it comes to a game, and if you're taking those choices away, you can see how very quickly it turns into frustration.
So that's a really interesting point you bring up there. The fact that within a game, as designers, we have the power to remove options, which is kind of a little nasty, maybe in a way. So forcing one or the other responses. That
yeah, and I think thinking about it, I'm like, it's not even just horror games, but even any games where you even taking the choice away from the player for things like narrative decisions and cutscenes, I feel like is that classic example where it can just instantly drop players into frustration if it doesn't align with their expectations and their emotional state.
You would need to do it very deliberately and know what you were doing to do that. So, but again, with here you've got that This model compared to the other one, you actually have that dimension. So you've got the opportunity to understand the dominant slash submissive elements of what's going on with the player, and to be able to design your game around that, whichever one you want to allow the player to do. So we just have a look. So there's some couple of examples here. It's kind of interesting to have a look. I think I really like this this model. I think it's definitely more complex than the other one though. So we've got again, you've got the two pleasure, displeasure, the valence. You've got the arousal, non-arousal, and then you've got the dominance, submissive. So this is using a cube to show these, and you've got things like depression, where you've got non-arousal, negative pleasure, or you've got displeasure, and submissiveness. So you've got depression down here, which would be the ultimate kind of negative, I guess. Not much fun. You've got disappointment there as well. You've got contempt. But then right up here, you've got anger. And this is what I mentioned before. So if we look at, so you've got the anger right at the top of this one. And right down the bottom on the other one, so the opposite of anger, you've got the fear there. And I think, see, these can often, I think in real life for us, swap between the two. We can go from fear to anger within a heartbeat. If we're fearful, we can step into anger, which is self-protection. But sometimes we can be angry, and then you realize, hey, you're facing someone who's has the ability to beat the crap out of you. It's like, oh, hang on, no. I'll go into fear. I'll go back into fear and not not take this person on. And I just find this really, really interesting. I really quite like this model, and would like to look at it further. It's also disgust and sadness. And then if we look at the next one, this is a little bit more, obviously, we've got on the right hand side, you've got fun, I don't know where that is, the colour. Exciting, joy, happy, cheerful, love, lovely, sentimental, melancholy, sad, depressing, mellow, terrible, shock, hate. So there's a lot of options, I think, for this kind of model as well. A lot more than other ones. I think there's a lot to explore using these models to sort of understand player emotional states in our games.
Yeah, I do look at the 3D model and just I don't know, I want to get into Minecraft and be able to map it out and have like an actual 3D representation, because I keep getting caught up on the 2D. I have a little Rubik's Cube of emotions.
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, I agree. I'm like, I'd like, if I had the time, I'd get into like Unreal Engine or something and build the same thing, and so you could sort of move it around and actually have a look at it. I think it'd be really. If you do that in Minecraft, let me know. We can show it on the next the next time we stream or something. But yeah, look, I just think the reason I went into this is just to show these off. I think these are really powerful tools that we haven't, the game designers haven't really used, as far as I know. I don't know of any game designers who are sort of using these sort of tools very much. They may be, it's possible, but
I haven't heard much formally about the use of it. It just feels more like I feel like a lot of things in game design where it's like people have stumbled into using tools like this without maybe knowing specifically, and then the knowledge and the technique is passed on without ever like making
without the theory behind it.
Yeah. I do feel like it might even help with the dominance submissiveness. I like how you were saying, it feels like in games we can switch between that fear and anger so quickly. And I feel like that's all down to that level of agency that you're giving the player in a given moment. I feel like the classic is like, if you're in a cutscene and something terrifying is happening, and as soon as you get the control of the player, you'll always get that group of players who will run just straight up to the monster or the bad guy and try and fight it. So I feel like my current plan is to sort of compact that y-axis into just being agency, until I can get a hands on with it and start getting a better grasp. I think for now, just agency is the sort of
I
midpoint for me.
think that's probably fair when it comes to specifically games, the sort of power that a player may have. And I guess if I think of, say, a game like maybe Elden Ring, so you may come across a boss who just pummels your ass, and you've got no chance of of beating them. So you might sort of run away or what have you. In fact, that's kind of part of the design of the game. When you first come into the world and you've got that is it the Erd Tree Knight when you first come out of the sort of
Yeah,
catacombs
Tree
area?
Sentinel. Yeah,
Yeah, Tree Sentinel, and you've got no chance of beating this guy. So it's not until you go away. You have to go away. You have to be submissive in a way. You have to learn your level of power. And you have to go away. You have to level up. You have to get weapons. You have to get because skill's actually another thing there as well. Don't forget skill. So when we talk about agency, it's not just agency, but it's also the skill that you may have as a player in using the tools at your disposal. But once you've done that, then you can overcome that situation. So yeah, that dominant submissive, because it's also power. And when you think of power, power is the power to defeat an enemy, for instance. And it all comes back to that sort of agency. So that's I think maybe you're correct in saying that dominant submissiveness is perhaps the dimension of the sort of interaction, the agency, the interaction that we have in games.
it's reminding me as well of I'm such a scaredy cat, but I find horror games so interesting. One of the things I find really interesting is that moment in a horror game where tensions are so high, but you die or you have to restart a checkpoint, and all of it's gone, and then all of a sudden the horror is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I find that's not typically the experience we want the players to have in that setting.
Mm-hmm.
But I also just made a connection back to Yakuza. In Yakuza 0, there's an enemy called Mr. Shakedown, or a group of enemies called Mr. Shakedown. And essentially, they're these really tough guys. And if you lose, they take heaps of your money. And so it's a similar situation where if you have a bunch of cash and you run into them,
Yeah.
or in a horror game, when
Yeah.
you're in it and
Yeah.
you're terrified and you're like, if I lose, it's going to be bad. So the emotions are high. But if you do lose, it's then what do I have to lose? In a horror
Yes.
game, it's, well, I know the game's not over, I just restarted the checkpoint. In Yakuza, it was, well, I have no money, what more can he take from me?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think
Rust's a bit the same. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I think, there's, in my mind, that's sort of that, it's agency, but it's not, like, it's emergent agency, I guess. It's something we can't control directly with numbers, but it's something we should be aware of will change dynamically based on other factors.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's obviously limits to what we can do, and we can only use these tools to a degree when we're designing those experiences. But understanding, so the pleasure, the valence, and the arousal. I mean, I think we have those in other art forms, I would say. So we have those in narrative, stories, music. The dominance, submissiveness axis. I think we only have that in games, and in fact, there have been studies done using using the previous model with just valence and arousal on music, looking at music. But I think this dominant submissiveness axis, I think, really is the one that maybe it sort of even allows us to combine the sort of art side of things. And when I say art, I mean like the things like, when I say art, I mean the visual experience, the auditory experience, and then you've got the the interactive experience. So I have the feeling this sort of may help us to bring all those together and to kind of understand where they fit and how to interact, how to create different experiences by bringing them together. So, yeah.
For sure. Yeah, this is. I think this is what kind of interests me most as a game designer. Is like you said, that bringing it together, and so yeah, having these tools is. I'm keen to sort of wrap my brain around them a bit more.
Yeah, well, I'm very interested to sort of dive into it more as well.